with plant health management, we try to create situations to support plant health, and you do that through a variety of mechanisms. But you also have to appreciate that the plant is capable of defending itself quite nicely. And so anything we can do to support that and understand it better so we can better support it is a good idea. So these secondary metabolites that we think about, these are things that the plant makes in response to something going on in its environment. And it's usually done in response to getting attacked by something that's trying to eat it or destroy it. And so a secondary metabolite is different than a primary metabolite. So when we think about primary metabolites, we think about things that are made through photosynthesis and respiration. The plant takes up nutrients and puts that in, builds up different parts of its cells and tissues. All of that is primary metabolism with primary metabolites. So that's like going on every minute of the day. Secondary metabolites are something that are usually have a restricted distribution in the plants, and they're being used against pathogens and pests and herbivores. They also use it with their ability to compete with other nearby plants. So the fancy term for that is called allelopathy, and that is where one plant can produce a chemical to inhibit the growth of a neighboring plant. And so they often do that so that they can get better access to nutrients in the soil or better access to sunlight. And then there's a lot of invasive plants that have made it here to America that are really good at producing allelopathic chemicals that our native plants don't know what to do with. And so that's why so many invasive species, one of the reasons why they gain a foothold quite quickly. Secondary metabolites are also used during discrete phases of their life, like during pollination. There will be secondary metabolites produced in pollination and also seed dispersal mechanisms. So you have it then. And then when they respond to abiotic stress, and I'll come back to this idea because there's some really interesting research on manipulation of abiotic stress on the plant within reason to manipulate secondary metabolite production. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Oh, come on. Okay, so this flowchart is kind of combining both the big picture idea of primary metabolism and secondary metabolism. So the top part is primary. And so this is stuff that's going on all the time inside the plant, minute to minute. And then this kind of greenish box is the idea of different secondary metabolic pathways, metabolic pathways. So the big yellow boxes, those are the three I want you to key in on. Okay, so we have terpenes, phenolic compounds, and nitrogen-containing secondary products or nitrogen-containing compounds. So these three are the three big classes of secondary metabolites. So those are what we know of in the sense of, all the secondary metabolites that a plant makes, they fit into one of those three classes or categories. And there are a lot of secondary metabolites. And so I'm just listing scratching the surface here on the right with these different bulleted points here, the flavonoids, polyphenols, essential oils, alkaloids, glucosinolates, carotenoids. All of these can be considered secondary metabolites. Carotenoids, they kind of cross over. They're a secondary metabolite, but they can also be considered a primary metabolite. There are a few exceptions like that. So please know these three names in the yellow boxes. Those are the three big classes. And so when you, by the way, when you look at secondary metabolites, the reason this topic is so hot right now is that we appreciate that when the plant is making secondary metabolites to defend itself, and then we eat the plant as it's doing that, it's actually, those secondary metabolites are good for our health. So that's kind of like a big picture idea, and that has been known for quite some time. But why is a little harder to get at. And so But we know that the same secondary metabolites the plants are making, they're actually critical for our human nutrition and health. And so there's a huge field of research looking at, how can we better understand this, whether it's food that you eat or medicine that you take. You often hear the term phytonutrients. Again, just remember phyto stands for plant. And so you'll see that a lot in the literature. Right now in the literature, when you look at how many papers are being published on this one secondary metabolite or group of secondary metabolites, polyphenols, it is off the charts. There are many, many publications on polyphenols. It's a really hot topic right now. So I'll mention a little bit about them as well. But when you think about polyphenols, this list is quite impressive. So when I was digging into the literature, these are all the things that were being mentioned that polyphenols can do for us. Antioxidants, anti-inflammatory, cardiovascular health, gut microbiome, cancer, brain health, low blood sugar, and that's just part of it. There's more out there that they point to. And so these are different, they might have heard eat a rainbow when you eat, have your plate full of rainbow colors. And that is a good idea because that way you're bound to get different polyphenols into your body. And so here they're just trying to show you some examples of that in that image. And here's another image where you can see some of the secondary metabolites listed out, those hydroxycinnamic acid, tannins, isoflavones, so on and so on. And so coffee actually has quite a bit of polyphenols. And so there's been that kind of big debate, is coffee good for you or bad for you? And actually, it's good for you. At least that's what they're saying right now. Catechins on the lower right is in chocolate. So chocolate's good for you from that perspective, within reason. Tea also has quite a bit of catechins. So you can find these polyphenols and phenolic compounds in a variety of different foods. And so the idea here is that we need a variety of polyphenols and other secondary metabolites. So there's an interesting area of research looking at, could we figure out a way to ramp up the production of these polyphenols by the plant? And when they started looking at this more carefully, they realized that if you stress the plant, a mild stress, you can get them to ramp up production. One of the first papers that I saw, they were a little off base. They actually, instead of doing abiotic, so when we say abiotic stress, that means without life. Abiotic literally means, non-living. So we're thinking about like stress it with drought or heat or some kind of adverse temperature. Well, one of the first papers I read on this idea of stressing the plant was actually biotic stress, where they were in a greenhouse and they released insect pathogen or an insect pest on tomato plants. And of course, I manage the greenhouse here, and I'm just like, oh, what are you thinking? And so they did that with the idea of, can we stress the plant well enough to ramp up secondary metabolites in the tomato fruit that we end up eating? Well, the short answer is yes. They definitely could see that secondary metabolite production ramped up in the tomato fruit, which, so in that respect, it was a successful experiment. But do you really want to release a bunch of plant pests into a greenhouse? And there's no. And so I thought that was a very interesting start to some of the earlier research. But now they've kind of switched. They're like, well, let's go abiotic. What happens if you stress the plant abiotically? And that's a little easier to control and quarantine and make sure that causing undue stress on other plants by pests escaping. Anyways, so here we're looking at that idea highlighted in yellow down there in that paragraph. The use of mild and controlled environmental stresses may provide an opportunity to improve health promoting qualities of many commonly consumed fruits and vegetables. So this is kind of a thing with people, especially now, if you think about it, this is something that you can pretty readily do in indoor growing, right? In a controlled environment, we have sophisticated computer control systems. I'll be talking to you next about controlled environment ag. And so now with the increased interest and many more businesses getting into a controlled indoor ag, this is a really hot topic. How can we manipulate the environment? And of course, if you're doing it in a building, it's much easier to manipulate than trying to grow a field of crops. I mean, you can't really manipulate Mother Nature. So there's only so much you can do when you grow the plants outside. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the next topic we'll be getting into shortly on controlled environment ag. So really kind of exciting work. So this is really getting to be a hot topic because of the pressure we're faced with human population. How do we feed? They're predicting 10 billion people by the year 2050. How are we going to feed all of them? And one idea is, let's make the food more nutritious per gram of tissue, make it more nutritious. And that is a viable way to think about it. Of course, that's not the only way they're trying to target this problem, but it's a good thing to think about. Okay, so let's go back to biotic stress. So secondary metabolites are also being produced in response to biotic stress. And I just wanted to give you a couple of basic ideas on how plants are defending themselves. And just to preface this by saying it's complicated. There's a lot more to it than what I have time to cover. So I'm just going to be giving you a little bit here. So there's a term called systemic defense. Okay, systemic. So we do that too. Our bodies will also do a systemic defense response. And that basically just means that it's going to be a whole body response to whatever it's getting attacked by. So in this particular image, you're seeing a caterpillar chewing on one of the lower leaves. And so what happens is this leaf that is getting chewed on will definitely start ramping up defenses against the caterpillar. So certain secondary metabolites are going to get produced to try to discourage that caterpillar. But they're also trying to show by this diagram that you also have these signals that will get sent through the whole plant body to tell the other parts of the body, hey, ramp up your defenses because you're probably going to be next. So here you see the word jasmonic acid. Jasmonic acid is a hormone. All right, so I want you to know that term. Jasmonic acid is a hormone that is commonly produced in response to attack. So when it's getting attacked by some living organism, whether it be often it's an insect. Insects love plants as food. And so you see this upregulation of jasmonic acid. And so it's a hormone that will continue sending the signal. They call it a signal cascade that will get produced by the plant. Okay. And it's a multi-step signal cascade. So it's a multi-step process that hormones tend to be toward the front of this signal cascade process, and they'll kind of kick it off. And the ultimate idea at the end of that signal cascade is the plant will shift its gene expression patterns. So it's actually affecting the DNA and gene regulation and gene expression. And so it will allow for the signal cascade to occur that, in this case, will ultimately tell the plant, turn on the right types of genes to start defending yourself against this particular insect pest. All right, so the plants actually can tell that it's being attacked by a caterpillar. Like it can tell, I'm getting chewed on by a caterpillar. One of the reasons or ways that they do that is they zoom in on the saliva. And so there's chemicals in the saliva that get into the tissue, the damaged cells, and that will get picked up on by the plant. And they'll go, oh, there's a caterpillar chewing on me. And then that will kick in a very particular signal cascade response, including jasmonic acid. And you also see here electrical signaling. So the plants can also send electrical signals through their body. So we do that. You know, we have electrical signals that go through our body. They can do that too. And when that was first discovered, that was not quite believed at first. They didn't really think that was true, but after very careful experimentation, they could see that it is occurring. And so again, those electrical signals can be sent through the body. It's just, you know, the hormones being sent through the body, those electrical signals being sent through the body. And it's basically, it makes sense that the plant has more than one avenue to try to defend itself, because it, you know, it really does need to ramp up quickly, and it's kind of like a 1-2 punch. You really want to make sure that they're up and running their defenses and that they have a way to defend themselves really effectively. And so they've been studying this more carefully, and they're finding that with the electrical signals, kind of hand in hand with that, there's also vibrational signals that the plant can pick up on. And so when we mean vibrational, we mean like that action of the caterpillar chewing gives off a vibration, and the plant can pick up on that. And so the plant has more than one way to figure out what's attacking me. In this case, with the caterpillar, it's the chemicals in its saliva, it's the vibration of its chewing, and then the electrical signals coming from that will also play a role. And then, of course, the hormones kick in and start helping the plant defend itself. The plant is also can send off volatile signals as part of this defense. And so if you think about, for example, really big trees that have a huge canopy, and let's say there's a caterpillar, you know, maybe there's 100 caterpillars chewing on the lower portion of the canopy. Well, one way to get the upper canopy quickly put on notice is to do volatile, right? If those leaves that are getting damaged send off a volatile that can go out the stomata, so it can just float upward. And so they've been able to document that there's volatiles that are given off like outside of the stomata and will rise up through the canopy. And so again, just ways to help with this whole idea of let's get our whole body primed and ready, because I can tell they're chewing on part of me. Pretty soon they're going to be heading to, you know, fresh tissue. And so we need to get our whole body going. And so you'll hear VOCs, you might have heard that term, you know, volatile organic compounds. Volatile organic compounds. So these VOCs, sometimes they're referred to in the literature as green-leaf volatiles. They just mean they're trying to get across the point that they're produced by the leaves and kind of often go out through the stomata and will impact other leaves. And then terpenoids, phenolics, alkaloids, these are type of secondary metabolites, different categories. So there's it just depends on what is attacking it, which secondary metabolite it might end up making. So, okay, so very sophisticated processes. So here is trying to get at a few ideas on this one diagram. So again, they're showing that caterpillar chewing on a leaf, and they're trying to show by the blue arrow that there's systemic signaling going on through the plant body. So that's going on, okay? Then they're showing this blue line off. What they found is that there's volatiles that will be given off by the plant under attack by this caterpillar to recruit the caterpillar's predator. And so the plant it's kind of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend idea, where the plant is like, hey, I got this juicy caterpillar chewing on me. I know you like to eat it, so come on over. And so in this case, it's a predatory wasp, and they can follow that volatile concentration, you know, the increasing gradient of that volatile over and find the caterpillar. And so really amazing ability, really quite good strategy, another strategy that it can employ to try to knock off its, in this case, the caterpillar. You also see this line here, this red line, where they're showing that anytime there's that bar like that at the end, that means stop. or inhibit. And so it's trying to show that some of these volatiles are discouraging other insect herbivores that are trying to gain a foothold. And then this other idea down here is that you see volatiles being picked up by neighboring plants. And so the plant under attack is sending off volatiles to the neighboring plants. And those neighboring plants pick up on that and go, oh, my neighbor's getting attacked. I'm going to ramp up my defenses. And so you see neighboring plants starting to produce secondary metabolites and their defense systems for, in this case, that caterpillar, even though they're not yet under attack. And so again, when this was first documented, people were like, no, there's no way that's happening. You did it wrong. But after several more experiments where they did like growth chamber experiments, indoor experiments, and then they went to the field and did it again, they could definitely show that this was occurring. So very sophisticated mechanisms in play here. And when you think about it, I mean, plants have been co-evolving with their pests and pathogens for millions of years. And so it does make sense. And because they can't run away, they have to be sophisticated and have a variety of mechanisms. Questions on that idea? So what we've been talking about is thinking about like insects or other herbivores that primarily do some pretty noticeable damage right away. Let's think a little bit about what happens when plants are attacked by microbes, like fungi and bacteria that might take a little longer and are a little more subtle in their initial attack. So I just wanted to, again, give you a general idea. And I don't have time to go into all of this in detail, but certainly the plants will have innate defenses against a lot of microbes. So we do too, like the fact that you have intact skin, that has oily secretions and all of that, that's an innate defense. Well, plants have that too, with the cutin wax, for example, over their body. That helps defend them against bacteria and fungi. But there's plenty of successful cases of different bacteria and fungal pathogens that can cause disease in plants. So the plants will be needing to defend themselves. And again, it's the same basic idea as what we just talked about with the caterpillar, where there's going to be secondary metabolites produced during this response. It's going to be in response to a very particular attack, so a very particular fungus or bacteria. It will need to recognize and then ramp up its defenses. And then in the microbial world, they don't just say systemic defense, they tend to say this phrase. So systemic acquired resistance is often, they say that when they're talking about a fungus or a bacteria that's attacking the plant. So they'll abbreviate it as SAR, S-A-R. So you're seeing stomata here, and two guard cells and the pore in between. And so that's actually quite a nice way for microbes to get in. You can see the size difference here. All those yellow rod-shaped cells are the bacteria, and they're easily getting in to the pore of the stomata. So that definitely is a way of getting in and causing problems. But some fungi in particular, for example, are good at just getting through the cutin on the leaf surface. They can release enzymes and just let them get all the way through. They don't even need a stomata necessarily, although I have seen really nice imagery of hyphae dipping into the stomata and getting it that way too. And then there could be a wound, for example, just like if you cut yourself, so that's a great way for microbes to get in. So the plant has to deal with that. And so, and then don't forget also with some insects, you have the issue of especially those ones that have piercing, well, really any insects, but now that I think about it, insects can carry in their mouth microbes that when they're feeding on the plant can cause, a dose of those microbes to get into the plant. So don't forget, that's another way for the plant to get exposed. Okay, so lots of different strategies for these microbes to get in. This image on the right that is, I don't have time to get into this in any significant detail, but I just wanted to try to show you that there's many strategies the plant will be using to defend itself. So here you see this rod-shaped bacteria that has a flagella, a couple of them actually. And so what they're trying to show here is that the plant will actually recognize, like often it's the flagella, like that will dock into this receptor of the this protein that the plant makes. So this is the cell membrane of a plant cell. And here is one of the receptors that picks up on, maybe it's a bit of the flagella of the bacteria. And that will be the way that the plant can go, oh, there's a bacteria hanging out on me and it looks like it might be causing problems. And then you see this idea of calcium showing up. So often we see calcium playing a role to kind of help send the signal into the cell a little bit better. And then you also see nitric oxide playing a role. So different chemicals will start to get used to help get this signal into the cell to help the plant make sense of what's attacking me and then how should I respond to this. Now, the stuff in the white boxes on this image, these are different strategies that the plant will use. Okay, so salicylic acid, I'd like you to know that, please. That's a hormone that the plant tends to make in response to microbes. Okay, so jasmonic acid, we said, was something that's often made in response to insect or other, chewing herbivores. Salicylic acid tends to be the route or the response that the plant will use for microbes. And again, it makes sense that there's a different way to send the signal so that the plant can understand, oh, this is a microbe, not an insect. Okay, and so there'll be different hormones, different signaling pathways. And then the phrases below that, hypersensitive response, phytoalexin biosynthesis, lignin biosynthesis, biosynthesis of hydrolytic enzymes. These are all options that the plant has, ways to defend themselves, okay? And I can't get into the details of all of those, but they're very different strategies. And so I just want to impress on you that the plant has kind of a toolbox of ways to deal with this. It's not just one little thing that it does. Okay, it's capable of kicking in several different defense mechanisms. And it really, what it's doing is it's trying to assess exactly what is attacking, and they can usually figure that out by these so-called elicitors. Okay, so the elicitor is just usually part of the pathogen, like the flagella or maybe a piece of its cell wall or something like that that it can pick up on. This other idea here, reactive oxygen species, that's often abbreviated ROS. Okay, ROS. So I just wanted to mention a little bit about that with reactive oxygen species. Generally, that's not a good thing. Like, we don't want reactive oxygen species in our body. That's generally considered not good for our health. However, plants will deliberately make reactive oxygen species when they're under attack. And in this situation, it can be a very good thing. In moderation and for a short period of time, it can be a good thing. And so what they're trying to show here is that when the plant picks up from that, elicitor docking into that receptor protein, it goes, oh, I'm getting attacked by this bacteria. I'm going to try to blast it with free radicals. So those reactive oxygen species, they're free radicals. Free radicals are bad for you, any organism. And so they try to blast the pathogen with that. So it's kind of like a bomb of free radicals. And hopefully that will discourage or inhibit or kill. And so that's kind of like one of the first things that will happen. And then you also see all these other pathways kicking in and different responses. And so, again, just trying to impress on you, there's multiple strategies that the plant can use, and it really is very sophisticated. But it makes sense when you think about the idea that they can't run away. They have to come up with a variety of responses to try to stay alive and try to deal with all the many pathogens and pests that attack them. Questions on any of this idea? So just like with the insects, the caterpillar chewing on the leaf here, and then the volatiles that get released, plants will also do a similar mechanism if they're getting attacked by a microbe. So here you can see down low, you have some kind of microbe attacking this leaf. And what they're showing here is that salicylic acid again, so that's why I want you to know that particular moment. So when the plant is like, oh, I'm getting attacked by a fungus, or oh, I'm getting attacked by bacteria, it'll start to produce salicylic acid right where it's getting attacked, but then that will go systemic. So they're trying to show this going through the plant. And then they're trying to show in this diagram that when the plant converts some of that salicylic acid into methyl salicylate or methyl salicylic acid, which is hard to keep saying, that becomes volatile. And so now they've turned that hormone into a volatile that again can be given off. It can float up to other leaves in that plant. It can float over to other plants and warn other plants that they're probably going to be next. And so these other plants nearby will also start gearing up a defense response to that particular pathogen. So no matter if the plants are getting attacked by insects that are causing more aggressive damage or microbes, they have some similar strategy in terms of getting a systemic response, getting neighboring plants up and running. So production of volatiles are a thing. And so all of these secondary metabolites and these signaling pathways, this idea of the plant needs to be able to understand who's attacking them and then respond in a very targeted fashion. So more like a rifle instead of a shotgun. And then they only do it, of course, when they're under attack. They don't have all of these chemicals and hormones up and running all the time, because that would be too exhausting. It would just drain them of energy and resources when you think about all the different things that attack them. So do it in a targeted way and do it only when you need it. So again, going back to the idea of secondary metabolites, they're really looking at this hard in the sense of when you look at growing crops or plants for commercial businesses, this is a thing that's really becoming a trend where they're looking at how can we better understand that and then produce plants that have really nice profiles of secondary metabolites. So here you're looking at kind of a flow chart where they're saying that we can really kind of tweak and target, and manipulate things, or they're looking at this idea of down here, they're talking about personalized nutrition. And so they're thinking that in the near future, that when you go to the doctor, they would be able to assess your profile through blood tests and other tests, and then that could help inform them how to personalize kind of diet and health diet and lifestyle in order to improve your health. And along with this idea, is recognizing that these secondary metabolites are often indirectly influencing our health in the sense that they're really directly influencing the gut microbes that hang out with us. our gastrointestinal tract in particular. And then the microbes work off these secondary metabolites, they metabolize them, they change them, and then those products impact us. And so what was confusing during some of the initial research with secondary metabolites in human health is that many of them aren't considered bioavailable. When they say that, they usually mean it won't cross our intestinal and get into the blood vessel. So then it doesn't directly reach our cells and tissues. And so that was confusing. It's like, okay, they don't seem like they're bioavailable, but yet there's good data showing that if you get these secondary metabolites in your body, your health improves. So it was kind of a head scratcher. And now what they're realizing is that the microbes in your gut are using those secondary metabolites, transforming them, and then the products that they make are bioavailable and will be used by you after they've had a chance to work on them. So lots of interesting research looking at all the different PSMs for plant metabolites. And so they're just trying to look at this idea of which ones are directly bioavailable, which ones have to be acted on, and just try to tease this out a little bit better to figure out, more targeted ways to help people, coming up with new drug discovery, phytonutrients that they can prescribe or advise you to buy. And so this is a big field of study. I found one paper diagram, prebiotic, but do you know what probiotic? Probiotics are the living microbes that you get exposed to that are helpful to you. And so if you eat yogurt, you're getting millions of probiotic bacteria in your gut by eating a yogurt, for example. And so this is a big field of study right now. So people who are in different agricultural industries or in the pharmaceutical industry, this is kind of a hot topic. And then don't forget about the endophytes. So when the plant is living, of course, it has plenty of endophytes in it. And some of the endophytes are producing really interesting secondary metabolites that perhaps the plant itself cannot make. And so some of them produce the same thing, like the Taxol drug that we talked about, but often they don't. The endophyte produces something totally unique. And that's what makes it so useful to the plant, because the microbe in the plant does the job of producing some chemical or some metabolite that the plant finds useful. And so they're looking at this as well as a way of secondary metabolite discovery and can use that to improve human and other animal health. So lots of research going on with secondary metabolites. And like I said, the polyphenols, for just a ton of research going on with polyphenols as secondary metabolites that are useful. So there's all kinds of papers being published looking at endophytes and what kind of secondary metabolites. So, I often get, and I've wondered this too when I was first getting into this type of research and looking into it, more carefully through reading, they say, oh, like you want to eat foods that have good antioxidant properties. And, how many times has perhaps your mom or dad said, eat your broccoli, it's really good for you, got good antioxidants. And so at least one of the readings I stumbled on, and then I've read two others that back this up. You look at, okay, why is broccoli really good for you? And it turns out it's because some of those secondary metabolites that the plant, in this case the broccoli, might make to defend itself against something eating it. Well, we eat food, right? So why would we be unique? It's not like we're different. A plant's going to pick up that a human is eating it, and it's probably going to start defending itself, right? And so as you eat plants, you're kicking. Remember, when you go buy, green leafy lettuce from the store, those leaves are living. They're not dead. And so, in fact, that one of the things I learned when I'm doing all this health research is before you eat your salad, your leafy green salad, tear the leaves. Tear the leaves and let them sit in the bowl for like 15 minutes. And during that 15 minutes, the plant's like, eek, you tear them, you're wounding them. So they're like, I'm getting attacked. And so they start making secondary metabolites that are good for our nutrition. And so, but it kind of begs the question, how come we aren't poisoned by it? Get sick from it? Like, when in this case, broccoli is getting chewed on by a caterpillar, it can be very effective at getting the caterpillar to stop and move on. And yet we don't die from it. So what's going on with that? And it turns out that, yes, we are getting exposed to toxins, but it is in small enough quantities for us that it actually triggers this mild stress response by our physiology. And so, for example, broccoli contains a secondary metabolite called sulforaphane, and that activates a stress response in our cells that then upregulates our own antioxidant enzymes. So, yes, broccoli has antioxidants in it, but it's not really broccoli's antioxidants that are doing the good thing. It's the fact that some of the secondary metabolites kick on our antioxidant pathways. And so it's kind of this, it's an indirect thing going on. So yes, broccoli does have antioxidants. Certainly, you can do an antioxidant profile on broccoli and up in the biochemistry class. And yes, it has antioxidants, but you'd have to eat a lot of broccoli to get the antioxidant benefit. And so basically, when you eat broccoli as a normal person, what it's doing is giving you an adaptive stress response. And so once I learned that, it's like, oh, that makes so much more sense because, we're not unique to the plant. That when we eat the plant is going to respond as if it's getting attacked. And so these secondary metabolites can be very useful to us, but not as directly as we first thought. It's kind of an indirect response. Does that make sense? So I thought that was really, really interesting. And I always wondered. Okay. Okay, so there are, along with this integrated plant health management, there's a section in the book on this chapter on weeds. I've outlined, there's several slides here talking about weeds. It's pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to talk about it in class. Use these slides. Oh, I'm going to say a few things, but most of them I won't. Use these slides as an outline of things I want you to key in on. And the book talks about all of this. So you can use the book for reference. But basically, when you define what a weed is, it's plants that are growing where you don't want them to grow. That's a weed. And a short way to say that is it's plants that are out of place. And so the reason, of course, we don't want certain plants growing in our field if we're trying to grow corn, we don't want, even if it's soybean, we don't want soybean there if we're trying to grow corn for our profit. And so, yeah, they're going to be competing for soil and nutrients, water, light. And so it can mess with your machines that you use to harvest. And so we have to understand their biology and ecology. And then we have to understand ways to control and manage them. And those are the two big kind of ways of approaching how do we control weeds in commercial crop production. And so some of the more interesting, I'm sure you could come up with, like herbicides, of course, is a favorite go-to. And certainly they do use herbicides, but and then some of the slides are talking about if you use herbicides, the timing can make a difference. So think about some of those ideas. It's all outlined here. One of the newer things, and then you think about some of the invasives. Does anyone know what that plant is? Yeah, spotted knapweed. So the outdoor plot, we have a field plot down by the Jacob Eddy Center. They can get, that whole field can get full of spotted knapweed. It's such a pain. And so they're super aggressive because they're invasive and our ecology doesn't support natural enemies for some of these aggressive plants. And so, and then they often have very strong allelopathic capabilities. So they'll excrete out all kinds of bizarre chemicals that our native plants can't deal with. And then they also have shown, they did a really nice study on spotted knapweed. Spotted knapweed changes the microbial composition of the soil dramatically. So even if you get people, you have to hand weed those out. You have to pull them out of the field. And then what they do is they try to seed that field with native plants. And what they're finding is native plants are struggling to get reestablished even after the spotted knapweed's been pulled out. And so some microbiology scientists went in there and they realized that the soil ecology has been profoundly influenced by the spotted knapweed. So just because you pull it out and then plant native seeds doesn't mean it's going to work. And so this is a real problem. And so sometimes it's done on accident. People are like, oh, such a pretty plant. I want that in my yard. And so garlic mustard started that way, and the Japanese honeysuckle. They're pretty, but they're just super aggressive and invasive. Know about kudzu? Kudzu? That one's pretty amazing. Where's the picture? I like this time lapse. Winter, spring, summer, fall. That's all within 1 year. Look at how the kudzu took over. Do you know how far north it ventures? We don't have it here yet. Hopefully it won't ever get here. I know it's in California. What? Oh, it's way far more north than I thought. Uh-oh. Let me just show you some, you can do this around your home. This thing on the right is a heat, like kind of like a high-powered hair dryer, and you can use it to burn the weeds. And then the one on the bottom, you actually use fire with propane gas. So that one you don't have to plug in, you can take it out into your field. And then look at this contraption. They actually sell huge tractors that zap weeds with electricity. So that front part is actually a way to generate electricity and target, zapping the weeds in the field. So they call it the weed zapper annihilator. So I didn't know that was a thing. So I thought, well, there's somebody who's earning some money. It's a very new idea. Yeah, that with the hot water. Yeah. So heat can definitely